Greetings. Welcome to this week's edition of Drupal Chat. I'm Mark Isaacson and I'm your host. You can find me at Vegan Triathlete on Drupal.org. And today I'm planning to talk about migrating from Drupal 6. Before I start, I just want to make it clear that I'm not going to be giving a step-by-step guide to how you migrate from Drupal 6. Instead, I'm going to be talking more in general about things that you would want to consider. Just ideas that you might want to keep in mind, questions that you might want to answer. So this is a much higher level type of discussion here, as opposed to a tutorial. So the way I titled this was Migrating from Drupal 6. But I didn't say from Drupal 6 to what? I didn't specify that. And so we would have a question then, migrating from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 or migrating from Drupal 6 to Drupal 8? And people might ask, well, why would there be a question about it? Why would anybody migrate to Drupal 7? If you do that, you're going to put yourself in the same situation that Drupal 7 is going to be reaching end of life before Drupal 8 is going to be reaching Drupal 8 is going to be reaching end of life. And that's certainly true. We don't know when Drupal 9 is going to come out. And so we don't know how many more years Drupal 7 has before it reaches end of life. I don't know how the new numbering system is going to affect things, whether that means it might even be longer till Drupal 9 comes out, because now there are more things that will be rolled into Drupal 8, which means that we don't need to have a next version number as soon as we might have. So very hard to say how long Drupal 7 will be around before it reaches end of life. Having brought that up, though, I think a person still needs to consider what they are doing on their site right now. What are your needs and what is currently available in Drupal 8? Now, something else that a person might bring up is to say, yes, but there is this migration facility that can get you from 6 to 8 with pretty much the click of a button. And that's not the case with Drupal 7. But still, you run into the same question of what are you doing right now? What are your needs and what's available? And that question actually gets doubled here, because not all of the contributed modules that are available in Drupal 8 have had their migration scripts written. So even if there is a contributed module to match what you're currently using in Drupal 6, and by the way, when we talk about matching that, I mean, it's the same module, okay? It's not that you get to say, oh yes, I was using this module and there's one that functions similarly to it in Drupal 8, and I'm gonna migrate from that module to the new module in Drupal 8. It's gotta be the same module that existed in Drupal 6 and also exists in Drupal 8 and has had its migration script written. So there's a lot of ifs there. So yeah, in theory, you could migrate directly from Drupal 6 to Drupal 8, skip that step in the middle and skip the headache of having to do any rebuilding. You just have this simple click of a button. So that's one thing that is a bigger question that people will need to consider when they're talking about the notion of migrating from Drupal 6. What exactly do you mean by migration? How old is your site? You know, how did you architect things? And what type of functionality do you have on your Drupal 6 site currently? Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that you do like the functionality that you have and you really just want to replicate that functionality. Well, there may be a better way to build that functionality in Drupal 7 or in Drupal 8. When I'm answering this question now, this is not making any assumption about which version you'd be looking to migrate to. It's a question that applies to both of them, that the way you build things in 6 may not be the way that you want to build them in the new version of the site, even if it's the same functionality. There just may be a better way to architect it. Maybe you have some things that you built custom and that you can now actually do through core and contributed modules. So this idea of migrating from 6 doesn't necessarily mean that you want to go, one-to-one from what you did in Drupal 6 into whatever the version that you're going to choose to migrate to. Maybe you just care about capturing the data, but you're going to redo the information architecture on your site. So along those lines, asking the question again, how long ago did you build your Drupal 6 site? Independent of end of life for Drupal 6, have you maybe reached the point that you should have been rebuilding the website anyway? When Drupal 6 came out, that was a version of PHP that was much older. That was a version of the web that was much older. It certainly was before any idea of mobile first type of design. So you may want to have a look at your site and ask the question, well, should we be rebuilding this anyway? And why maybe not take advantage of the fact that Drupal 6 has given us the kick in the backside by reaching end of life to revisit our site and think about how we really should redo it to bring it up to modern expectations right now. So let's continue for the sake of argument that a person says, well, all those questions are well and good, but I'm on Drupal 6 right now, and I'm not really happy about that, and I want to be off Drupal 6 sooner rather than later. And I don't really want to get caught up in all of this discussion right now because I really just need to get off Drupal 6. And so that could be one argument that a person would settle on to say, all right, I've made my decision. I'm going to migrate to Drupal 8 because this gives me a quicker path. I don't have to re-engineer everything right now. Excuse me. I'm going to go to Drupal 8 because I've got this pretty simple process that comes as part of Drupal 8's core functionality. And at least it'll give me something that I can run on for a while that's going to be more secure than what I'm doing right now running in Drupal 6. And I don't care if it's architected perfectly or not. If I'm going to be rebuilding, I'll be rebuilding, but now I've got something that buys me a little bit more time to rebuild. And it may be easier for me to go through the process then of making this transition. So again, you're going to end up coming back to the question, though, whether your modules that you've used in Drupal 6 exist in Drupal 8 now, whether they have the migration script written. So it's not necessarily going to solve the problem for you instantly that way either, saying, well, I just want to get it on Drupal 8 to buy me a little bit more time before I re-engineer my site. You may still end up in this same situation of having to do a bit of re-engineering. So maybe you're getting the sense of what I really am driving towards here. I think that this idea of having the migration functionality built into Drupal 8 is a big step forward, and I do think it's a wonderful thing. And at the same time, my suspicion would be that if you're looking to get off a Drupal 6 site, when it comes right down to it, you're probably going to have to look at re-engineering some things one way or another. Maybe though, you wouldn't have to do as much re-engineering if you decided to go to Drupal 7 instead. So that could be an argument for why you might choose to go to Drupal 7. Sure, there's not this easy migration process, but you may find that the modules you're using in 6 do exist in 7, and so you pretty much just need to create that same information architecture there, and then you would need to import the data. That could be one way that you might approach it. There is documentation, and I'll admit I haven't actually done a migration from one version to another on any of my projects now. I haven't followed those instructions, but I know there are the instructions there that you can follow for how are you going to upgrade your site from one version of Drupal to another. I'm giving a suggestion that may enable you to not really follow those directly, or maybe even at all, to say, well, let me just take a look at this. And what I've got in 6, it can be mapped pretty much directly in 7. That contributor module is there now. So let me just quickly put my information architecture in place and copy the data over. And then I'm going to call it good. Maybe you would take a look at the documentation and see about what was the old way of doing the upgrade process before, and maybe I'll have a go at doing that and getting myself onto 7, because I think that is actually going to give me an easier way to buy myself some more time here. So a couple of things that maybe you could approach to buy yourself some more time. One final word on migrating to Drupal 8 is that you might say, okay, right, it doesn't have the direct migration because the module I'm using either doesn't exist in Drupal 8 or hasn't had the migration script written, but still I'm willing to just drop that off, like just lose that bit and just pull in whatever I can pull in automatically, and then I'll worry about the rest on my own. So maybe that would be like a third option that a person would consider for the process. This is all keeping in mind the approach of saying, I'm not re-engineering, I'm not rebuilding my site right now. I really just want to get this same site moved over into a different version of Drupal while I buy myself some more time. And that may be fair enough. Of course, the pause lets you know the other shoe is going to drop. Here comes the big but. And I don't know if you've guessed it, but we're talking about the information architecture. We're talking about the data, but we didn't talk about the theme layer yet. There's no way that you're getting around the theme layer. There is no migrating from your Drupal 6 theme to a Drupal 7 theme or a Drupal 8 theme. I'll admit I haven't actually researched this. This is an assumption that I'm making. If I'm wrong about that, people can absolutely point out that fact that I'm wrong, and that no, if you were using this base theme or whatever, you are able to migrate. You don't have to totally redo the theme. It ports across nicely. I don't think that's the case, and that's the assumption that I'm going to work under here, just based on the fact that, like, considering something like Zen or considering something like Omega as the base theme, I do think they've changed substantially enough between 6 and 7 that there really is no migration path for that theme layer. If I'm wrong, go ahead. Tell me about it. This replay will be available on teachyourselfdrupal.org. You can put it into the comments, and we'll all have the chance to maybe learn something then. And I will own up to it. But even if you could bring the theme right over, I'm still going to bring up the argument about, do you really want it to look exactly the same as it did before? And you might say, well, yes, I do. I mean, especially if I can port it directly over, like, I don't care whether it's mobile first now or not. I again just want to make this quick and buy myself some more time. So these are the types of things that you're going to have to answer for yourself when you're plotting your strategy to migrate from Drupal 6. I've tried to give an example here of how you might argue both sides and the types of questions that you're going to need to answer. What is fine staying the same way, at least from from the browser, from the client side of things? What is going to be fine to stay the same on your site when you migrated to whatever version you migrated to? And what are things that you think really do need to change at this point, that it's time to do something about it? And then let that weigh into the approach that you're going to take. And then that can help you to focus on a decision for, are you going to go to 7 or are you going to go to 8? And do you want to, the nice thing about Drupal 8, I will say, is that it is a pretty simple process. You do not have to invest a lot of time to try that automatic migration. And in fact, you don't have to put it on an internet accessible server either. You could even do this in a local environment. All you need access to really is the database, your Drupal 6 database, the credentials. And in the migration process, you give those credentials and then it pulls things in and it will give you a report. But again, I said this wasn't going to be a type of tutorial where I walk you through that, but it is worthwhile throwing that out there, that this doesn't have to be an all or nothing or an either or you set your path and you charge down that path and that's just the way that you do it, no matter what comes. And so it could be worthwhile for you to even just do the test run of taking your Drupal 6 site and seeing what happens when you just import it directly into Drupal 8 and see how happy you are with those results. So I think I've pretty well covered the points that you're going to want to consider when you're going to engage in this process. And so to recap, what's your site doing now and what's available to map that same functionality? Do you want to keep the same functionality or do you want it to change? Are you looking to buy yourself some more time before you engage in the re-engineering? Do you want to address things in the theme layer that may need to be improved? And so if nothing else, I hope that what you've been able to get out of this chat is the recognition, and maybe this is something that you won't be so happy to hear, but is the recognition that this isn't a cut and dry, straightforward question. It certainly isn't something that's just as easy as like, oh, how do I run Drupal 8's migration functionality? That's all I really need to know, and then I'm done with this. That there's a bigger picture that you need to consider here. I'd welcome any questions or comments that you have, your thoughts about migrating from Drupal 6 and what you're thinking you may be doing. And perhaps some of you are considering things that I haven't mentioned at all. Like here, I'm operating under the assumption that you're going to be migrating to another Drupal platform. And it might be interesting to hear from any people who would say, well, forget about it. I'm getting away from Drupal. I'm migrating to something else. And so that's yet another option that I didn't cover at all until this point. So thanks for tuning in today. I hope this was good food for thought. I welcome any comments you'd like to leave. And next week, the plan is that I will be talking to Kathy Fees. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name properly, her last name. I'm sure Kathy will correct me next week to let me know. Her nick is YesCT, and we'll be talking next week with her. So until next week, ta-ta for now.